okay, okay. Well,
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Larry, and I'm not asking questions in any specific order. And do you think that things are getting better or worse in terms of couple stability over the years, according to your experience? Couple are more stable, less stable, more troubled, less troubled? No, just from your own observatory, from your room, what do you see?
Well, I think what I think is that couples are fairly stable. I have a feeling that, infidelity rates, are stable. They're relatively high. The levels of couples bickering and fighting. I think the thing that changes in society, especially in America, is, people are delaying, especially college educated professional people, delaying more and more getting married, delaying
Yeah,
more and more having kids.
yeah.
I think the divorce rate keeps hovering around 50%. So, I think let's say, as the society becomes more permissive and doesn't force people to stay together, then I think you see the sort of percentage of people who sort of on their own sort of stay together and have successful long-term relationships, which I think is probably kind of low. Because if you think that
So,
50,
pardon, it is low, the people who are able to be stable on their own, or low is the instability?
uh, well, because I look at this from an evolutionary point of view, I think probably just species wide, it's low.
Yeah.
Like maybe 25% of people maybe make it in having stable monogamous relationships. And I think it more,
25% only.
yeah. And
Oh,
I think, what happens is in the more conservative patriarchal societies, they basically force people to stay together.
yeah.
So, and, I'm sure, I think the infidelity rates aren't any lower for men, they're just lower for women in those societies because the double standard and the consequences.
Mhm.
But I think from what I've read, like in Europe and in America, the women are definitely catching up to the men in terms of the infidelity rates because the consequences aren't as severe. So I think in the more conservative patriarchal cultures, the female infidelity rates are suppressed.
Yeah.
But I think if you look at what's happening in America and probably, Western Europe as well, well, let's say if 50% of couples get divorced, and of couples who are married, 25, let's say, percent of women cheat, 40% of men cheat. A bunch of people just stay unhappily married because
Yeah.
they don't have, because they don't have viable alternatives.
Yeah, that's the
And
old
the
way. That's
percentage of people who are staying married because they think it's a good deal and it works out, and they pass up opportunities for infidelity. I mean, nobody's calculated that statistic,
yeah.
but my guess is it's 25% or maybe lower. I
Yeah.
wouldn't think it's higher than that.
So,
So,
pardon, sorry, Larry. So, 25% is your estimate about stability?
yeah, or lower. I don't think
Or
it's higher
lower?
than that. Yeah, I don't
Yes.
think
Yeah.
it's higher. So
Well,
that's my
well.
observation. But as therapists, we have a skewed sample. So, the people who are okay with their marriages, they don't come to see us. So
But yes.
we have a biased sample.
Yes, but if I may ask you personally, and because my interest in the topic, or our relationship deemed to be stable or to break up, I've read more or less in the same time your book and Stephen Mitchell's one, Can Love Last?
Oh, right.
Okay,
Yeah.
and because I was curious, and I'm writing my own book about the topic. It will be more, more a pop essay, so to say, less scientific. And but I had the same impression, that is, happily married, stable people are not so many, and not just having my therapy room as the laboratory, but it was my environment. I hardly see couples of my friends that were stable. So if you move out your room and observe the world near you, would you say the same, that stability and happiness in long-term relationship is low, or no, even worse, a better, softer picture?
Yes, no, I agree. I think it's a minority of people who have stable, long-term relationships with good enough sex lives, good enough security, uh, and are staying together because it's a good deal and they don't want to screw it up. Versus, I think there's some percentage of, stable monogamous couples who are just, miserable and just stay together because they don't have alternatives.
Mm-hmm.
They might not have affairs because, whatever, maybe nobody wants to have sex with them,
That happens.
or maybe they don't want to get caught, or they have low sex drive, or
Yeah.
whatever. So I think, certainly a certain percentage of people who will never divorce and never cheat are, are miserable.
Yes.
But, as far as I know, nobody's calculated a perception,
Yeah.
but it's a minority of people.
It's a minority.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you made an observation a few minutes, a couple of minutes ago. That is, it mostly like you suggested, if I'm getting it right, that if we adopt an evolutionary perspective, evolution is not for stability, is not for fidelity, so to say. Is that what you meant, or not really?
Well, my understanding of the evolutionary theory, it's Buss and Schmidt have what they call sexual strategies theory.
Yeah.
So they have short-term strategies and long-term strategies.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of research that, certain personality types are more long-term strategists. So people who are securely attached, people who are high in reflective functioning, people who are low in narcissism, people who have good communication skills, people who are more authentic. So those people are more oriented towards long-term mating. And I think what you would see is, of those minority of people who do have successful long-term monogamous relationships, they would be high on all those personality variables.
Yes.
And I think there's certain social situations, or you could say ecological conditions, that support long-term monogamous relationships. So,
well, you noted, there was a very interesting passage in your book. That is, when you noted that, in a way, a wealthy environment favors long-term relationship,
yes.
while problem, starvation or lack of resources is more for what Marco del Giudice calls a fast
Right.
lifestyle.
Exactly. Yeah, it's what they call life history strategy.
Yeah.
So people on the slow life history strategy favor higher parental investment, lower investment in mating. It's a more long-term strategy. And sort of resource stability favors that. Resource instability favors the fast life history strategy, more investment in mating, reproduce early, less investment in parenting. But I would say an exception, because I think you see the alpha males with a lot of resources, they want a harem. They don't want monogamy. So I think monogamy is really the subordinate beta male strategy, who's got a good job, stable resources, isn't rich, isn't poor. Their best bet is have a stable long-term strategy. And I think certainly like
No,
now,
that is nice. So, you know, having a decent amount of resources, not too much,
right,
not too low, then probably you are stable.
right, yeah.
That's a nice picture. I will
Probably
write that.
if you're a Russian oligarch, you don't need to be monogamous.
No,
You
I
can
don't
do
think.
whatever you want.
I don't
You
think
can do
so.
whatever you want.
Yes. Probably. I'm probably
Uh,
not just a Russian oligarch. I think no, that's off the record.
Right.
But,
Well, I'm just making a joke.
but
But
you know, I
yeah,
think
no,
that
look, you see it in this country. You know, in
yeah.
the U.S., there's always some alpha male
Yeah.
who's getting in trouble with Me Too because they don't want to be monogamous. So
Absolutely.
it happens a lot in the States.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, Larry, and you know, you seem to pay a lot of attention to two broad dimensions underlying stability versus instability, and one is attachment. Okay, the second, as far as I understand, is narcissism, and I have to say that I disagree a bit with the second, but you know, just for the pleasure of conversation, you know, that I think that narcissism is a bit less relevant than attachment. I mean, I said it more straightforwardly. When I think in terms of personality disorders, there are many personality disorders who can make people proner to infidelity. Sometimes the opposite to narcissism. For example, avoidant personality disorders, they may have difficulty with intimacy, difficulties opening up. So when they get in trouble into one relationship, they are probably more likely to find soothing elsewhere. Okay, a person with dependent or borderline personality disorders who need a lot of signals from the external environment in order to feel somewhat loved and appreciated, they are probably more proner to search for involvements, no matter whom, so to say. So probably to me, it's not just narcissism, but you know, what is your opinion?
No, I don't agree. I mean, I think when I wrote the book, I was trying to convey that there are multiple personality variables, that I wasn't trying to say that it's just narcissism exclusively.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, anxious attachment is associated with infidelity.
Yeah.
Avoidant attachment is associated with infidelity. High narcissism is associated with infidelity. And narcissism is correlated with insecure attachment. So, you know, so I think, I mean, to some extent, almost all forms of psychopathology increase the levels of infidelity. I mean, maybe schizoid people or people with Asperger's might be a little less likely to cheat, or maybe some paranoid people who don't want to get an STD. But I think what you would see is infidelity goes up as psychopathology goes up. And there might just be a few types of psychopathology where people are just more sex avoidant or intimacy avoidant that would be less likely to cheat because they don't want to be close to anybody, or they don't want to get an STD or something like that.
Well, Larry, now let's make it, if you want, more personal. And you know, my interest in this moment of my life and about, you know, our relationship deemed to be stable, no, also that the more time passed by and the more I observed people around me very close cheating, couples that I thought that would last forever divorced. Okay, so and that was painful somewhat. Okay, sometimes I endorsed some moralistic attitude. So I blamed my friends because I didn't like what they were doing, but I didn't like myself in the position. Okay, so what's the point? I'm not a priest. Okay, so I started to reason. Okay, what's the larger picture? Okay, and I'm curious about what is your personal motivation to explore such a thorny field?
Oh, well, just to be personal, I feel fortunate to be among the lucky minority. I've been married since 1986 and had 3 kids. And I feel very fortunate as I move towards retirement to have a stable, good relationship with my life partner. Minority.
Exactly.
But I mean, I think at a personal level, I certainly have had fantasies and temptation. And certainly, like when I became a college professor, I was, I don't know, 31, 32. And I'm, surrounded by, very attractive women from 18 to 20. And where I teach at Adelphi, it's like 80% female and doctoral students. So certainly, it's interesting because back in the 80s, when I first started teaching, the students would flirt with the professors. They don't do that anymore. At least here, the culture has changed.
They don't do that anymore.
No, well, either I don't think they do it. I think possibly as I've gotten older, of a target. So I think when I started teaching, probably some of the students saw me as a viable
alpha man.
And maybe as I got older, but I haven't seen them flirting with any of the younger professors either. So I do think there are cultural variables that change. So there's certainly temptations, but so from a personal level, it's not something I've done. It's certainly something and then, when I was single, I never tried to be a mate poacher, but probably on occasion, sometimes married women made themselves available. Basically, everybody who cheats needs somebody, whether they're married or single, who's willing to have sex with somebody they know is cheating on their spouse. And probably most people feel there's some, you probably shouldn't sleep like with your best friend's wife or your best friend's girlfriend, or maybe you shouldn't. So some people are actively looking for that. And maybe some people, let's say like the way I was when I was single, I wasn't necessarily looking for it, but I wouldn't necessarily pass up the opportunity if it fell in my lap. So even though I didn't feel good about it, and I sort of felt it was wrong, I wasn't going to take a pass.
Yeah. And on the other side of the coin, have you ever experienced in your life, with your wife, in your story, or had to face jealousy? So were you ever jealous in a way, so to a certain extent disturbed you, or you had to face jealousy and it wasn't that easy to deal with?
Well, yeah. Now, my wife's a psychologist. She's just too busy seeing patients and making money. She doesn't have time to flirt with other guys. But I think that's also some of my point. Like, if you're a dual income couple and you're building a team, like I'm much more affluent being in a stable dual income couple, and I would definitely suffer like downward mobility if we fell apart. So, and we also want to pass on resources to our kids.
Yeah.
So, so there's a lot of perks. So even if I'm, taking a pass on some sexual opportunities that might be available, there's a lot of perks, a level of affluence I couldn't have on my own, an ability to pass on resources to the children and maybe have grandchildren someday if I'm lucky. So if you're a well-functioning team, like, why mess it up?
Yeah. I agree, I have to say. And as a therapist instead, and did you remember sessions with infidel cheating couples that, or polyamorous or whatever, that you felt difficult in terms of your emotional reactions. So I didn't like the situation. I really, I don't like what I'm listening to. This man, this woman is something you know, it's really upsetting me. And some situation that was a bit difficult for you to handle emotionally.
Well, what I found out, I wouldn't say so much the moralistic reaction, because I think over time I've just got very philosophical, like this is the way people are. People
Yeah,
cheat, people
yeah,
get betrayed, people steal each other's mates. It's part
yeah,
of human nature. Some people sublimate it, some people don't. I remember even something Freud said that really stuck with me. Like, like he said, most people don't integrate love and lust. So basically, if being successfully monogamous means integrating love and lust, and then Freud, with his observation, said, well, most people just don't do that.
yeah.
It's kind of developmental ideal, but most people don't get there. You know, then I'm sort of philosophical about it.
Mhm.
But what I have found difficult, especially with couples therapy, and I'm seeing this more and more, I think at least in the US, things like open marriage, swinging, polyamory are becoming more and more people are trying that. And then when you have a couple where they started out monogamous, but then one person says, well, I don't want to be monogamous anymore. I want an open marriage, or I want swinging, or I want this or that. And the other one doesn't. And they're both adamant. And then they come in and say, okay, Dr. Josephs, fix it, resolve it. Like I feel, well, you know, okay, you want this, you want that, you know, there's some irreconcilable difference there. So I find that very challenging, you know, when people don't want to break up, but at the same time, there's just some irreconcilable difference. And, you know, I'm not going to take sides. So I find those situations sort of very hard to negotiate, just because think people want some quick fix or some
Yeah, yeah,
definitive,
yeah.
and I don't. So I think what I find difficult, not so much that I have some judgment, but clinical situations where I feel, I don't know, ineffective, inadequate, that people are looking for an answer or a
Yeah.
quick fix, and I don't really have it. So those situations, I guess I like to feel effective as a therapist. So the
Well,
main
and in the case of you know, open marriages, polyamory, swinging, and do you have a story and of which you know the outcomes in the medium term? That is, they started this way and then things ended up as they splitted, they still together, they still polyamorous, they became monogamous, they hated each other, they still love each other and are stable. Just one example that can illustrate what to expect.
uh, Well, I could think of one example where an open marriage worked out and one where it didn't.
Yeah,
So the
beautiful.
one where it worked out was actually a gay man I was working with, who, you know, would have a lot of casual sex, and he, you know, he would hide it, and he didn't feel good about that. So when we discussed the issue of having an open arrangement, and after a while he took the risk and brought it up, and his partner was open about it.
Oh,
Then what was interesting is they both agreed to have casual sex, but without intimacy.
yeah.
Then after doing that, then he terminated treatment, and then he came back 2 years later and he said, oh, his partner was having sex with intimacy, and he was all upset about it. So then,
So it didn't work.
well, the way it's sort of it's said is, you know, we talk about, well, like, look, you like casual sex, your partner likes sex with intimacy. So could you get your head around it? He was jealous. And he was saying is, because he would know some of his partners and said, oh, his partners look at him so adoringly, nobody looks at me adoringly. So he had the jealousy. But I think as he was in this idea of being happy for your partner, and accepting your partner, he basically said, like, look, okay, my partner's not going anywhere. He's not going to run off with somebody else.
Oh, good.
These infatuations, they don't last for more than 6 months or a year. So, if this is what he likes, I like what I like. He likes what he likes. We've been together 20 years. We're not going anywhere. So it all worked out.
No, that's a nice example, really.
And I think I had it was a straight couple where the guy, was having affairs. He got caught, but then he said, no, I don't want to stop having affairs. Now I want an open arrangement. And the wife was, I can't live with that. And again, it was a stalemate. And it was like, okay, Dr. Josephs, get us past the stalemate. So then I just did sort of like the cost benefit, I clarified the situation. But I'm just saying is like, look, one of you, if you're going to stay together, will have to begrudgingly accommodate, either the wife, you'll have to live with his extramarital sex life, even though you resent it, or you'll just have to take a pass. So it's not for me to say one of you will have to make that sacrifice to stay together and you'll resent it. It's not for me to say who will begrudgingly sacrifice, but if neither of you wants to make the sacrifice, however reluctantly, I don't see a future for the relationship. So then after a month, the husband actually said, no, I'm 65, I want to grow old, I'll sacrifice the extramarital sex because the relationship is important.
Yeah.
So, but, I've seen also other situations once where it ended. Once I worked with a woman where the husband said, I want, an open arrangement or polyamory or something. And then she said, oh, you're not the person I thought. The person I married was into monogamy. So even though you haven't acted on it and you want it, that is a betrayal. You broke it. And then she just divorced him.
Okay, so very straightforward.
I worked with her for a number of years, and she did find somebody new, got married, had a baby. But she was like, that was a betrayal that you even said you wanted it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Very, very rigid in a way. I just have one last question, and always, you as a therapist, and so it was not about being uncomfortable because of moral standards. Did you ever face situations in which you were somewhat attacked by one or two members of the couples, and that was a bit unpleasant to handle? I have those experiences, by the way. I think we all have them, but
Oh, yeah, that happens all the time. I don't like that.
You don't like that?
I don't like it, but I do it.
I would say
it's been a struggle for me as a therapist. I am hypersensitive to criticism, but I also sort of realize that times you have to call people out on stuff when they're in denial and burst their bubble, and then they often lash out in anger. So I've sort of, even though I don't like it when patients lash out in anger, I've sort of learned to tolerate it and not let the fear of that alter my interventions.
Can you remind me of one episode in which you were on the verge of losing control?
Maybe I still see the patient. There's a very narcissistic guy. He was cheating on his wife with a very good friend of the family, and a text accidentally that meant for his lover got to one of his 3 daughters, and then the daughters all confronted him, and then he said he would end it. But then one of the daughters told her best friend, and her best friend's mother told his wife, and then they ended up divorced. And then a few years later, he was really in the doghouse with the daughters. They didn't, felt betrayed. And he was really sort of complaining and angry and wanting to confront them. And then because of the mentalization, I was trying to have him have empathy for, you know, where his daughters were coming from, and browbeating them for pushing him away wasn't going to get anywhere. And then he's like, lash out, says, "Oh, you're a fucking prick, you know, you know, you're a prick. Like, you know, I'm losing my daughters here, and you don't have any empathy." And of course, I'm trying to like save his, because the daughters, he's also like a bit of a rageaholic, and the daughters were all scared of him, on top of feeling like he betrayed
Pardon,
them.
a daughter was, can you repeat, was a bit of a rage?
Yeah, he lashed out in anger. And
Okay.
then I remember, like, you know, obviously I wanted to lash out in anger back, like, you know, but, you know,
Calm down.
I contained it. I didn't respond defensively. You know, the saffron and Moran, you know, repaired the rupture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because now we joke about it. I still, that was many years ago, I still see him, and we joke about that moment. But yeah, like at that moment when he lashed out in anger, you know, it was, you know, and I'm sure I've said like sarcastic things that there are times where people lashed out in anger. I don't lose my temper, but I'll say something snarky or sarcastic.
So you did in a way for a few seconds. So
yeah.
No, I pretty much understand you. And in days like this, okay, you face anger and criticism and despise, which can be typical of men with narcissistic personality disorder. And when you close your office that night, that afternoon, okay, so maybe some of these feelings still linger in the air. And what do you do to self-soothe? Do you need some extra comfort, you know, a steak, an ice cream, a walk, a conversation?
Well, I used to. Actually, my new interest after infidelity, so I've moved on to dieting. So,
Pardon,
yeah,
sorry?
I've moved on to the psychology of dieting. So as I got older, and my cholesterol and blood sugar went up, I've had to lose weight. So I've had to wean myself from emotional eating and comfort food for health reasons. I've actually become very interested in that. So my go-to self-soothing until I was 60 years old.
Okay, so it was more about food and drinking, basically.
Right, but yes, since now I'm 8 years since I've had to lose weight for health reasons. I've had to find healthier ways of self-soothing.
That's beautiful. So, you know, so it is not much about becoming wiser, but it is more about cholesterol levels. So that is real wisdom.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I think is just the way I am without doing anything.
Yeah.
Once I get triggered, you know, I'll probably have like one bad night's sleep, and then 24 hours later, or 1 to 2 days later, it fades. So basically, I don't really have any magical way of making myself feel better when I'm triggered. But fortunately, when I am triggered, I guess like what they call distress tolerance. I see if I just ride it out in a few days, I'll be back to normal.